It's sad to think that we have preventative treatments. We have a 12-minute IV push that you can do once a year maybe to sustain health, and it's fighting against the FDA to allow us to do something. Real-world evidence on me. I've never been harmed by it. I've been doing stem cell treatment since 2008. Absolutely zero side effects, only benefits from it. But to this day, I still have to fly out of the country for a 12-minute IV push. My name is Tracy Love, and I was diagnosed in 1999 with multiple sclerosis. So multiple sclerosis, it can look like anything because it depends on what area of your brain that it hits. That's why you see somebody who has no mobility with MS. You can have, if it's in the right frontal lobe of your brain, you can have PTSD, you can have depression. So it's hard to understand a lot of people with MS have the common things of fatigue. You can have drop foot, lose your mobility, but there's a whole lot more involved with it. And that's why it's a difficult thing to diagnose, because it looks so many different ways. It mocks so many different symptoms. At that point, the DMD drugs, the injectables had just come out on the market. So they did tell me, you're really fortunate because we have some treatments where prior to that, it was kind of normal just to say you have MS and kind of send you home, no medications. They do steroids when you had relapses, but other than that, as far as a daily drug, that wasn't available. So those were pretty new to the market. Went in and met with my neurologist, and he kind of gave me a rundown. He handed me a brochure and said, here's 3 different drugs, all injectables, pick one, whichever one you want to take. And that kind of blew my mind, because I was like, I don't think I'm qualified to pick a drug here. But it was basically, you can have a deep muscle once a week, you can do every other day for subcutaneous. So upon diagnosis, I was completely dependent on my neurologist on what the FDA drugs were. I started doing a little research on it, and I decided to do the once a week deep muscle shot. It gave me major side effects, so we switched over to they were the ABC drugs. So I did from Avonex to Beta-Seron, major depression, horrible sites where I would inject. I had indentions and my body was sore. Switched over to Copaxone, same thing. And so at that point, I'm looking into the drugs. There's a 30% efficacy rate on these, and they were all black box label drugs. So I started kind of looking and thinking, okay, these are kind of making me sicker. I could have liver failure. There's a lot of risk with this, and I'm not sure that it's working. Talked to my neurologist, and he basically told me, this is what we have on the market. That's all that we have. So I stuck it out for a little bit on the Copaxone, and then an infusion, Tysabri, came on the market. They fast-tracked that drug. And I thought, oh, that's great. It's an infusion. That's much better. Went and got my first injection of that. A week later, they came on the news that it was killing people. One of the patients died from PML, a brain infection. So they took that drug off the market. And at that point, I was starting to really think, okay, what am I actually taking, and what is it doing to help? So Tysabri was no longer an option. Went on to a different drug. Got tachycardia, had to monitor me after that. So my neurologist finally, I had to switch neurologists in the meantime. But the new neurologist said, these drugs are probably too hard for your body, and I don't think you can take them. So at that point, I found myself as a no-option patient. Still mobile, still had invisible symptoms, no treatment options. So I did go to Washington it's probably about 10 years ago. We were working on a federal registry for MS and Parkinson's. All we were asking is to update the numbers, because like I said, MS numbers haven't been updated since the 70s. Couldn't get it passed. And we were going, but we don't understand. Don't you want to network this together and know how many people? It comes down to one thing. It's a huge benefit to have an orphan disease. They get a lot more funding for it, because if it's not a prevalent disease, then we need to throw a little more attention to it and figure out what it is. So there are a lot of politics involved with that as well, on keeping sadly, at the end of the day, all of this comes down to money, not finding an actual cure or the best treatments for the patient. It's more about money. They know these drugs, the MS drugs, they knew it had a 30% efficacy rate. So I had a 70% chance it was going to give me liver failure or who knows what. There's a whole huge list of symptoms it can do. But that's what they want us to be happy with. It's like, yeah, that's your choice, and that's good enough. But that isn't good enough for me, and it's not good enough for anybody else. You want to be able to sustain your health and not worsen your health by taking a drug that gives you horrible symptoms and side effects. So what drove me to stem cells? I had 2 small children, and I was literally in bed all the time. Fatigue was just overwhelming. I'm still in my, early 30s at that time, and I'm not functioning very well. I got my mobility back, that came back, but fatigue was really dominating my life. And I found there was a Fort Worth policeman who was going to get stem cells for his MS. And I thought, well, I didn't know anything about it. I called him, I figured out how to get hold of him, and I said, is there any way I can just watch you through this journey? Because I'm kind of desperate. I'm trying to figure out how to sustain my health, and I can't really take any of the drugs. And so he allowed me to kind of watch him through that journey. He emailed me back and forth, let me know what was going on. And that was the first that I had heard of it in 2007, and that's when I decided that is what I wanted to do. When I went to Costa Rica, I was, like I said, the fatigue was awful. And I had such brain fog that it was, I guess the best way to describe it is looking through a lens that's out of focus. That's how my brain felt. And when I got my first treatment in Costa Rica, it was like, it was pretty emotional. I remember just clarity coming in. It was like everything came into focus with my brain. And it was the first real hope that any of us had had in a long time. I came home, my little girl, I was in the backyard, and it's August, it's hot. I went out, I actually twisted my ankle I was gonna do gymnastics with her because I'm thinking could do that. But just the fact that I could get outside, I could stay outside and go to the pool with her. Massive quality of life improvement for me. So with my treatment, everywhere from probably 3 to 5 years was what I could go between treatments. And a lot of that, stress can really aggravate MS. So, I had to kind of really manage everything about my life and change a lot of things. So I just explained it as simple as I know how in layman's terms, which it's basically a putty that migrates to damage in your body, and it attaches itself. They seek out the damaged parts of your body. They repair and they take inflammation out. So, when people don't understand the treatment and they say, well, it didn't really do anything. I went and got a treatment and I didn't do anything. I always ask them, how many symptoms did you have when you went? Oh, I had like 15. Well, how many do you have now? I don't know, about 6. Well, then it worked. So you manage your expectations. It's a therapeutic dose. I was aggressively working with the MS Society. Thought we were all on the same page, but at that point, the MS Society they tried to restrict me from talking about the stem cell treatments. They said it might affect donors, and it might be, so, that was my awakening, I guess, where I'm not against the MS Society, I'm not against the FDA, but when you find yourself outside of that box and you still have to find a way to sustain health and to fight for your treatments, at that point, it was really difficult. I was excited about it. I wanted other people to have hope who didn't have hope. So that kind of started my advocacy efforts. We started a group called Patients for Stem Cells, and basically the premise behind that was to just try to network. It wasn't disease specific for any one. We didn't want to just focus on MS. We saw the need with just across the board. And our hope was to just educate people. We weren't saying go to one specific place, don't stop taking your FDA drugs if they work, but if you are really at a loss and at a point where you don't have a place to go, we wanted to be a resource to help them navigate through. It's been worldwide. With Patients for Stem Cells, we've talked to people definitely from other countries, probably probably thousands. It became a full-time job, and that evolved into trying to navigate through and advocate for extensions of right to try. So we never actually turned it into something where we would make any money at all out of patients for stem cells. We did that intentionally because when I go up to the Capitol, I don't want to be compromised. I don't want to be a sellout. And we all agreed. I've been offered a job as a lobbyist up there because we do a good job, because we believe in what we do. But it was not about that for us. It was about being not only credible, but I did that on my own time, my own money. And the message was not distorted that way. They knew our passion was real. I wasn't paid to stand up there and say that stem cells worked. I was a walking witness and testimony to my own journey. And so that's why we never have and we never will accept money for what we do anyways. I think if you want to go up there and be credible, and in that world, it's very important to be able to stand there and say, I'm not paid, I'm not compromised in any way. This is my story. I'm here to tell it for other people who can't. So extension, right to try is basically if you have a chronic condition, you can try a drug, especially if it's in a phase 1 clinical trial. It gives you the ability to access that drug. Or if it's an off-label, if it's a drug for something else that it might be beneficial to you, then you can get access to that drug. So that was a whole new area where we thought it would be, hey, we're just going to go in, we're going to talk to legislators and explain this. And the obstacles we hit were just really mind-blowing. And it's due to a lack of education. Number one, when you talk about stem cells, everybody thinks embryonic. That's what they go to. We're talking about hazmat, which is if it's an embryonic, obviously that's not what we're advocating for. Embryonic cells want to be something else. They want to develop into something. These cells, umbilical cord cells, are hazmat, and they can go into your body. They migrate to damage. They repair. They're anti-inflammatory. I'm like, there is nothing wrong with any of this. So it was a huge educational campaign in the beginning, just literally walking around and explaining what stem cells were and why they were not this taboo thing. So with right to try, several states were on board, but federally it was not. So the state of Texas, there was a legislator who passed away from cancer. He was, had he had access to cells, he would have probably survived, but he did not. So we named it Charlie's Law in his honor. We did pass Charlie's Law. However, so in the state of Texas, what you can't do inside the United States right now is use expanded cells, which means if you take it out of your body, if you take out X amount of cells and you put in one extra cell other than the X amount you took out, it's now considered modified in a drug. And that is there was a language change on the Federal Register several years ago. It was done at midnight without the proper consent, and that's what allowed them to change this. So because of that, many years ago, that took stem cells, something in our own body, or the off umbilical cord cell, and made it a drug, which is not, that's a battle in itself on changing the language back to why it was meant for organ donations. On how they changed the language, how they did it was wrong, and we knew that. So with right to try, we got it passed where you could do expanded cell treatments in the state of Texas. But you've got federal going against state, and federal is the FDA. So none of the doctors were willing to be the pioneer to go out and do the first treatment and say, yeah, we'll go ahead. It's legal in the state of Texas, but the FDA, they can still come after you and say, all right, we're going to take your medical license. You're administering a drug, even though, it's a very difficult thing to maneuver because of a lot of the politics in it. So we worked at the state level and got it, then it got passed at the federal level. So we have right to try laws in place, but we still can't get it where you can execute the expanded cells. Still a lot of politics involved with that. So we're trying to reverse what was done many years ago. And I wouldn't say for nothing because it's baby steps and it's David and Goliath. And the more real-world evidence that you see, which is what we did, I always made sure I wore my high heels when I went up to talk at the Capitol and testify. I said, I don't look like there's anything wrong with me, but you need to understand what a no-option patient can look like. It can look like this. It's sad to think that we have preventative treatments. We have a 12-minute IV push that you can do once a year maybe to sustain health, and it's fighting against the FDA to allow us to do something. Real-world evidence on me. I've never been harmed by it. I've been doing stem cell treatment since 2008. Absolutely zero side effects, only benefits from it. But to this day, I still have to fly out of the country for a 12-minute IV push. You know, in the beginning, we were trying to go state to state. We were trying to get groups to jump on with us so that we could get this extension of right to try in every state. So I think that would be a good starting point, because if all of the bulk of the states are agreeing on this, then federally we could maybe have more pull to try to, FDA, I think the biggest issue with the FDA on that, when you take a fat, how do you patent it? It takes billions of dollars to bring something to trial, to make it to come to fruition. How are you going to patent your own fat cells and do it? So there's a lot of obstacles in it, and it comes down to money. I mean, it literally does. It comes down to money. I'm never claimed to be any big lobbyist or anything. I am literally would love to not be a part of this at all, but because I got diagnosed with a disease, I got thrown into this arena. When we were fighting for this, they sent pharmaceutical lobbyists from Washington, D.C. to Texas to fight us, some little diseased woman. And we were blown away. I mean, when you're going against an industry, the average MS drug is $78,000 a year. So you're going to take the $70,000 just for MS, and you're going to threaten that. You look at all the other diseases across the board with these DMD drugs the biologics are expensive. You're threatening a lot of money. And when you do that, the gloves come off. And you're not really a patient anymore to them. They don't really care. They're going to try to kind of take you out, and that's what we experienced. So making stem cells legal, which that word to me, I hate to even say legal because they're safe and they're not a drug. But according to our FDA, they are a drug. So we'll go with that. You're threatening a probably $1 trillion industry. I don't know how much money these pharmaceutical companies make. It's astronomical. You talk about getting rid of rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, MS, go through those drugs and do the math. That's what we're up against, and it is absolutely 100% a huge threat to pharmaceutical companies. I don't believe that they will ever allow it. If we can ever get control of regulating the FDA and they don't have such overreach, we have hope. But as long as they're that Goliath with a huge overreach of power that's not put in check, and they're allowed to be interchangeable with the FDA and pharmaceuticals. One day they're the CEO of a pharmaceutical company, then they go back and forth. That's unethical. So that needs to be addressed. Fighting through that and putting ethics back in it, that's a problem, and that's one of the things we're up against. If this were to become legal in the United States, I think you would see, as far as aging, cancer prevalence, it would be amazing to see what Americans are getting more and more unhealthy. It's just a fact. Heart attacks, overweight, there's diabetes. I mean, stem cells can help with diabetes. I mean, it helps with all of it. So what would we see? We would see a much healthier nation, in my opinion. It shouldn't be something that you do when you get diagnosed. It should be a preventative, and everybody should have access to it. So the battle that we have on the awareness, on even if we have to send people out of the country right now to get it in the country, this is the mass. Anything you do in mass, if you do something in numbers, you're going to be heard. So if you can't unite together, it doesn't matter, MS Society, that muscular dystrophy, all of it. And honestly, working with the associations don't work because the donations they do, they run it like a business. Patients have to advocate for themselves. We have to have groups that bond together, help people navigate through, help find the funding and the resources to get people the care that they need. At the end of the day, I know way too many people who have passed away because of denying access of treatment. They couldn't make it out of the country. That awareness needs to be out there. You need to hear those patient stories. Those voices need to be heard. What we're helping with is not only awareness and hope, but if we get this in masses, it's going to force them to look at the treatments. If you get one treatment done, if you get the clinical trial done with muscular dystrophy, and then we have right to try in every state, and you've got chronic patients, at that point, the FDA shouldn't be able to come in and tell these doctors, well, I know it's legal in the state of Texas, but you can't do it. The pressure needs to be on. The treatments are there. The clinical trials, you can run them forever, or you can look at a person and watch where you're bedbound, in my case, like I was, and now I can live a productive life. That can't be taken away. You can't hide that. And I've been told multiple times, especially by the two people that had conflicts of interest, that it was just placebo. Well, I'll take placebo any time, day of the week. I think anybody would if it made your health better. It's just like me going outside of the box for when I hit the roadblock of being, like I said again, no option patient. When you hit that and you know you have a treatment and you know that it works, you have to go outside of the box on all of it. I think the whole healthcare system, the way it's structured right now, the doctors are hamstrung because they're working more with a corporation. It's about the bottom line and the dollars, more than patient care. There's going around with concierge doctors using that format where you're not hamstrung by insurance companies. That to me is one of the ways that we're going to have to move forward with this, self-funded insurance. So, if you go to a company and you tell them, here's the benefits of the stem cells, this is what it could save you. You could have more productivity from your employees. They're not going to miss as much work if they have the issues, even from orthopedics standpoints. I mean, they're beneficial in so many areas. And I think that's completely restructuring it is our only chance because our current system is broken. It is not patient-centered. It is profit-centered. And until we can shift that, that's the obstacle that we're up against.